nationwide educational project ReInforceUA, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week on ReInforceUA.com.
Шановні колеги, друзі, добрий вечір. Мене звати В'ячеслав Покотило. Від імені першої в Україні бізнес-школи МІМ я маю честь привітати вас в проєкті ReInforceUA. Все подальше спілкування відбуватиметься англійською мовою, і я прошу тих учасників, які потребують перекладу, відразу натиснути кнопку Interpretation. Вона внизу вашого екрану. Починаємо. Dear colleagues and friends in Ukraine and from all over the world. I'm Vyacheslav Pokotilo, Professor of Strategic Management at MIM, the top Ukrainian business school that is aimed at developing business leaders and facilitating organizational transformation for sustainable growth of Ukraine's competitiveness. On behalf of MIM, I'm happy to welcome you at ReInforceUA, the project that is designed to intellectually support and inspire the Ukrainian business community. During next weeks and months, we will be able to meet here the world's renowned intellectuals who will share their views on most demanding problems and the humanity is facing now, and which became especially critical because of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. This project was made possible due to support from BHF Foundation and the three global associations of management education, ASCSB, AMBA, and EFMD. We are grateful for all donations you have made while registering on our platform. Please be aware that any additional donations can be done at any time at our web page. The funds raised will be directed to support temporarily displaced Ukrainian women who want to launch their businesses. A few technical remarks before I shall give the floor to our first lecturer. Today's, as well as the following lectures, will be live, and we shall have some time for question and answers session at the end. Please type your questions by clicking Q&A button at the toolbar down the screen. Please do not use chat for this purpose. All lectures and Q&A sessions will be recorded and will become available at ReInforceUA website afterwards. And now I'm proud to welcome our honorable guest, Professor Guy Standing, with the very first lecture at ReInforceUA. Professor Standing is a labor economist, the author of widely known books, The Precariat, The New Dangerous Class. He's professorial research associate at School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. Professor Standing is the founder and honorary co-president of the Basic Income Earth Network, an international non-governmental organization that promotes basic income as a right. I'm sure today's lecture is absolutely unique, and we encourage you to thinking over Professor Standing's idea, even if they will look too revolutionary from your opinion. Revolutions happen, as we in Ukraine well know. Professor Standing, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And it's a great honor to be with you today, and especially to be the first person to give a lecture in this series. And as I know, Slava, that you come from near Bucha, I would like to say a very special welcome to anybody who's from that neighborhood. We all know what it means in this terrifying war. And I want you to know that myself and all my friends in every part of the world, in our association, is 100% supporting what you're doing today. The admiration for Ukraine and for Ukrainians has mounted dramatically during the last few months. And I had the honor of working in Ukraine back in the early 1990s, when I was director of the International Labor Organization's technical staff and programs in what was called the transition period in the breakup of the Soviet Union. And I would like to begin, before I develop the main theme of my talk, by recalling a few relevant facts from that period. Because I worked in Russia and Ukraine and Belarus to a certain extent. And during that period, I mixed with government ministers at the highest level in Moscow and St. Petersburg and Kiev and Minsk. And I was convinced at the time that what the Americans mainly were pushing on all of those countries was profoundly mistaken. It was called shock therapy, very specific word, term that was really about an economic strategy for reform. And those of you of my generation who witnessed what happened in the 1990s will understand that the war and Putinism are directly due to those policies in the early 1990s. What happened was that the Americans and other foreign donors insisted that the first thing that the governments should do was liberalize prices. Now, price liberalization meant that all the price controls of the Soviet era were ended. And automatically, this led to an incredible hyperinflation that was much worse in Ukraine, rose to 10,000% inflation in 1 year, I remember when I was working there. And in Russia, it was 2,300%. Incredible figures that devastated the lives of millions and millions of people. And I remember that this was very interesting because life expectancy in Russia dropped for men from 64 to 58 in 3 years. And it dropped also in Ukraine, but by much less. And that was because the previous government had had the wisdom or luck, let's not discuss this, to make sure that everybody had access to a plot of land on which to grow vegetables and so on. I think that was a very key policy of survival. And we saw the result. It didn't make everybody rich, of course not, but it helped in surviving. And the second policy they made is they wanted to squeeze inflation out of the economy, and therefore they insisted on cutting state spending. Now, this policy was designed to squeeze the demand side of the economy, but it had a consequence which is totally disastrous. The consequence was that all civil servants in Russia and in Ukraine suddenly had their earnings reduced to starvation level. I remember cabinet minister in Moscow asking to see me and asking me for a donation of $50 to feed his family. Now, a consequence of that was that they were totally open to corruption. And we cannot totally condemn them for that corruption because they had survival. The only thing they could think about was survival. But what it did mean was that the oligarchs and the ex-KGB were able to operate in an atmosphere of kleptocracy. And it encouraged a view that the past under Stalin was better than the future under the transition. This was crazy. And I was invited to the US State Department in Washington to brief the CIA and other officials in early 1993. And I said, your policies are creating a vacuum in which kleptocrats and evil people will capture the state, and there will be economic and social and political disasters down the line. And I remember in 1993, when they had the elections for the Duma in Moscow, a certain man became leader of the biggest political party in that election. His name was Vladimir Zhirinovsky. And those of you who know that one of his dreams was to invade Ukraine. And all the way through his life, he said Russia should invade Ukraine. So now we are in a different period. We're seeing the consequences of that disaster with the invasion of Ukraine. And I want to put the current circumstances into a global context. That global context is what we call in the world of economics, rentier capitalism. What this means is that more and more of the income and wealth of the world is going to the owners of property, financial property, physical property, and intellectual property. So we are seeing globally an enormous increase in inequality. And I have written a book called Battling 8 Giants. The 8 giants are those that are stopping the road to a good society from emerging. And the first giant is inequality. We will not have a sound, stable economic system globally if inequalities like today continue and grow. And the business community that I've addressed in Davos or in Silicon Valley have the good sense to know that business must accept this as a desirable reality, reduce inequalities. The second giant, which is generic all over the world, is chronic insecurity. Now, insecurity has terrible effects on people's behavior, on people's minds, and on society in general. A society which is chronically insecure, even without war or without hyperinflation, if people are chronically insecure, they become unreasonable, mentally insecure, and mentally listening to Putin's or Donald Trump's or Boris Johnson with their extremist views. And the third giant threatening the world economy, and of course in Ukraine as much as anywhere before the war, is debt. We have a huge problem of debt that makes the world economy highly fragile. The fourth is stress itself. Before the war, the world's economies, world societies were suffering from a pandemic of stress, which was affecting attitudes, affecting mental health, affecting physical health, and causing life expectancy in the United States to drop for the first time. This is enormous development. The fifth giant is a giant of what I've called precarity, a feeling that you don't have rights in the state. You don't have cultural rights, civil rights, economic rights, political rights. And the sixth is the threat of technological change. We have a situation where automation is disrupting and creating more inequalities. It is not reducing jobs. There will be plenty of work to do for everybody. but it is increasing the inequalities. The seventh giant is the threat of extinction. Global warming, pollution, disappearing species. I've just written a book about the blue commons, the blue economy of the sea, and how it is being terribly affected. And the eighth giant is the one you know better than almost anybody in the world. And that is the threat of neo-fascist populism. Neo-fascist populism means that when people promise to bring back some past, some great past, people who don't have a good today and don't have a good sense of the future listen to these voices and they vote for a Donald Trump or a Putin who sees himself in the line of Peter the Great, Ivan the Terrible, Lenin, Stalin, Putin, a greater Russia, a populist, bringing back what he imagines in his warped imagination, the great past. We mustn't think of Putin as a single individual, but of a global trend of people playing on people's fears and insecurities. I know many Russians who are educated and are cultured people who are in agony today because of the war. But the system in Russia has left majority of people uneducated, uninformed, and therefore supporting a populist fascist. This is where we stand today. And this comes to what I've been working on for the past 30 years. I have been proposing that in the context of globalization, the economic system, we need to move towards every individual in every society, every man, every woman, and every child having a basic income as an economic right. What this means is that some modest amount should be given to every man and woman, every child through the mother or the surrogate mother, if there is no mother alive. And that should be guaranteed as an economic right. Without conditions, it's your right as a citizen of Ukraine. And this policy, I have been fortunate enough to put it into practice in many countries, in all 4 continents. It's a very strange experience. Now, the methodologies have varied, but I can tell you this, that in something like 80 experiments around the world, the results are broadly the same. When people have a basic income, their mental health improves. When people have a basic income, their schooling improves for their children. Their nutrition improves. And they work more, not less. And they work more productively, with more energy, with more enthusiasm, not less. And in particular, a basic income enhances the freedom to say no to an exploitative person or an oppressive landlord or an oppressive partner. Women's emancipation is enormously increased when they have their own individual basic income. It's a matter of justice. It's a matter of freedom. And it's a matter of having basic security. The psychologists have taught us that if people are chronically insecure, their mental bandwidth shrinks, their IQ, their intelligence goes down. If any of you have had periods of insecurity, even before this war, you will know what I mean. But think what the war is doing for people's mental capacities. It's reducing their intelligence in the short term. And therefore, it will be vital to implement a full basic income when this war comes to an end. I'm very pleased to know that in a sense, the government had already been moving in the direction of a basic income through the Tremenka scheme. And I know that the Oleg Ostenko in the president's office has said that a basic income will come. I think this is wonderful. And I think it must be done with a plan that is conveyed to our foreign partners in the European Union, in the United States, in Canada, in the UK and other countries, so that a plan can be drawn up to implement a full basic income immediately it's possible to do so. And that must be done in combination with a package of aid on food, on housing, clothing, rebuilding the housing situation, roads, and so on. But it will be vital as far as possible from a business point of view to give ordinary people the capacity to spend as they think is appropriate. Let the market determine which way the economy rebuilds. Yes, you will need planners. Yes, you will need foreign assistance. But unless ordinary people are enabled to have control of their lives to a certain extent, that top-down approach will not work. And more deaths will take place because of insecurities, because of incapacity to have a sense of a future, which a basic income offers. I believe that if this terrible war can be brought to an end and Ukraine can emerge with its integrity, its honor, its dignity intact as a country and as a culture, I know enough Ukrainians, I know enough about your wonderful culture to think that this could be a harbinger of a good society for the 21st century. And your bravery and your courage today is setting a standard which will lead other people to say, Ukrainians are us, and we together must build a more convivial, more resilient type of society, so that if we have another COVID pandemic or economic shock, the people themselves will be able to have sufficient security to be able to deal with it. This is my message today. And I believe enough people in Ukraine are thinking along these lines that we have a good chance to do that in the months ahead. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Stendin. Encouraging, emotional, as almost always when you present this idea. And now comes questions. We have probably 20-25 minutes to do this. First question from the audience, you can also read it, somehow related to economical influence and how basic income and inflations are linked together.
The link between basic income and inflation reminds me of a pair of scissors. A pair of scissors has two bits. One bit, you could say, is the basic income, and the other bit is increased supply of goods. Because if you give people basic income, they go to spend. If they spend, they stimulate entrepreneurs and firms to produce more goods and services. You're not dealing with a situation where you have total full employment. In those circumstances, if you increased the money supply, inflation would take off. But in the wake of this war, you are going to have a huge surplus of unused equipment, unused people, and resources that need to be mobilized. That is why in my lecture, I said that introducing a basic income when the war ends will have to be combined with a short-term period in which foreign donors and countries provide Ukraine with basic goods and services while they remake their society and economy. Otherwise, you will get that inflation. But we must remember, and I've summarized the results in this little book, when we've had in other countries a basic income, it's resulted in prices going down simply because it stimulates more producers to produce more because they know they'll have a market with people with money to spend. But of course, in the immediate end of a war, it will take a few months before the two scissors can come together. But I believe you must do it in that way because otherwise people will not have the capacity to recover.
Okay. You know what once mentioned in other lectures that you support this idea not actually because of economical reason, but because of a moral reason. And now we have a question from the audience related to this, let's say, moral aspects, or let's say social moral aspects. If universal basic income is provided by government, and then it creates a dependency of all citizens upon government. Government, as we know, may use it differently, this dependency. Will it mean that they will be somehow too obedient, not very loyal with respect to those who gives money, which is actually, let's say, like anonymous in this piece, if Putin government give Ukrainian universal basic income, will it mean that everything will be fine? Well, I know one of your answers on these questions, but I believe it's good if you would interpret it.
Yeah, I think we're all dependent on other people, and we're all dependent on having a good state. I think I'm one of the many outside Ukraine at the moment who thinks that your dependency on your president as a leader during this conflict is something that has been wonderful. I would nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize immediately. But I think we must not worry too much about this dependency issue. We're all dependent, and every government provides subsidies and tax reliefs to various interests, money for nothing. But it doesn't give ordinary people that basic security. I believe that it's a matter of common justice. The income and wealth of every single one of us, you and me included, is far more to do with the efforts and achievements of the many generations before us than anything you or I do ourselves. But we don't know whose ancestors, yours, mine, somebody else's, contributed more or less to the public wealth of our country. And therefore, you can see a basic income as a common dividend, a share in the collective public wealth of the country. It's not a matter of creating dependency. It's a matter of creating independence. a sense where you can be entrepreneurial and take risks, a sense in which you can be tolerant and altruistic and not fearful. We must have more faith in the human condition. Now, for me, this is also a matter of freedom. I believe in freedom, and freedom can only come if we have access to material resources so that we can say no. If you can't say no to an exploitative person or institution, you don't have freedom. And furthermore, I think you can design the basic income system to make it independent of politicians and the particular government of the day. You can set up, and this is what I've recommended, what I've called a commons capital fund, which gradually uses eco-taxes, wealth taxes, and taxes on land, big land ownership, and on the oligarchs to build up a fund from which you can invest in building an ecological, sustainable economy and pay out dividends to everybody that would gradually rise as the value of the fund goes up. This is what Norway has got. This is what Alaska has got. You don't have to think of it as a back of the envelope exercise. Commonly, people who don't know how it would work quickly dismiss it because they say, well, there are 40 million people in Ukraine. If we gave them €100 a week, multiply that, you get a huge figure. Impossible, impossible. But that's not how it would work. You would actually tax back from the wealthy, made marginal increase in the tax rate. You would see that there would be a multiplier effect. That is, if you give 100, people spend it and it generates 130. So the economy would start to grow automatically and the cost would go down. It would have network effects. A pilot scheme in Canada, for example, found that people who had the basic income resulted in an 8% decline in their demand on the public health service. This saved public money. And therefore, the tax burden went down. So you have to think of the dynamics of this system. And you have to think of one thing. John Maynard Keynes, the greatest economist of the 20th century, said, if there's anything we really need, we can afford it. And that means that the business community, the economists, the politicians have to think what it is that we need to build a good society. And surely we need a society in which every Ukrainian of whatever age, whatever background, has basic security to feel that they can look after their basic needs. If we as a human society cannot do that, we are pathetic. Of course we can do it, and of course we can afford it. And there are various ways that I haven't mentioned, but the way that I prefer it is to build up a capital fund. But initially in Ukraine, what I would hope is that there would be a big tax on the Russian oligarchs' fortunes around the world that would be sufficient to give every Ukrainian a basic income for at least a year. I have no doubt whatsoever that if 10 or 20% of the wealth of those Russian oligarchs was captured and put into this fund that I'm talking about, every Ukrainian could have that without raising taxation in Ukraine. Come on, we should demand it.
I can't but agree with you if you could consider the wealth of total oligarchs or even Russian oligarchs worldwide, but then we come to practical issues. I would not go deeper into taxation matters, which is quite interesting, but we don't have enough time for this. I would rather raise a certain issue related to the world you made almost used, if I'm not mistaken, and which Thomas Piketty uses as the word is socialism. And this Thomas Piketty, Professor Piketty calls it participative socialism, etc. Practical issue is the following. Currently, we are in Ukraine, let's say, looking forward that we shall be able somehow to overcome and then started to rebuild and to revive the economy. And mostly, of course, we will depend upon international help, support, and finances. And most wealthy countries which are going to provide or at least declare that they will provide such a support currently have not yet introduced, let's say it softly, basic income idea to their societies. And now I come to the question of if I'm not mistaken, Christina Batruch. How these countries? Let me read the question for not to easy. I fully support the need to reduce inequalities worldwide, but universal basic salary is perceived by many democratic states as a social measure. So don't you think that such countries may withhold their support to the construction of Ukraine if it is introduced as universal basic salary? Very relevant question, let's say, the practical, in Ukraine, everything is fine, we have full of ideas and everything will work somehow, let's assume, but then we anyway need support of UK, US, and some other countries, and they will say, wow, you're introducing socialism. We are not supporting this. How would you react on this?
First of all, it isn't socialism. Socialism is the state control of the means of production. If you have state socialism, it's the state that is running the economy. This is the opposite of that. This is letting ordinary people help run the economy through their pockets. As it happens, Milton Friedman, a right-wing economist, monetarist, long before he died, he joined our network because he understood that for a well-functioning market economy, people had to be able to choose. They had to be able to make choices about what they did, about what they spent, what they developed themselves, and so on. And he understood that as the basis of a free market economy. Friedrich Hayek, who is, accredited as being the architect of neoliberal economics, he also supported a basic income. Richard Nixon very nearly introduced a basic income in the United States. Martin Luther King supported it. So it isn't a left-wing socialist tool. You can have any political value, whether you believe in a strong state or a weak state, or a market-friendly state, or a state-friendly state. It's not inconsistent with having a basic income. A basic income enables people to live with dignity. People who live with dignity want freedom. They want equality of treatment and status, and they act and vote more constructively, more altruistically. This is what we want. At the moment, we are living in a global economy where too many people are living in fear and insecurity and inequality. And this is what's making them vote for extremists of the left and right, more of the right than the left, but voting for extremists. We need policies that enable people to be more convivial, more slow, more cultured, more civilized. And for me, old labels like communism and socialism and capitalism, they're not very helpful in the 21st century when we're surrounded by a geopolitics of tension between China and the United States, Russia and the rest of the world, and where inequalities are multiplied. And we have to think differently. We have to think as we would want our children to be living. I want my children to be living in security. I want them to be able to make choices. We're not saying that everybody should have the same income. No, anybody who says that, that's a lie. We're saying they should have a basic income and then be taxed on all their earned income. Normal rate of tax. So it's not a discouraging method. It's a method to liberate. And if ordinary Ukrainians don't understand that today, I would be very surprised. I think they would. We've had opinion polls during the COVID pandemic across Western Europe and in Poland that show that about 2/3 of the populations of those countries now support having a basic income. And I was asked to do a musical, very strange for an economist, a musical by Massive Attack, the musical group, about why we need a basic income. And that has been seen in English over 500,000 times. It's also in German, it's in Italian, it's in Spanish and French, I think. It's been seen all over the world. And I can tell you that the reaction of ordinary people is, yes, this relates to what we need. And we can do it. But we have to have the courage to demand it.
We have, I believe, still time for a few more questions. I'm full of them, but I should pay attention to questions asked from the audiences. And let's do it the following way. There are a lot of questions about how to finance it, but you somehow already answered, I believe, these issues. Let's not to come to this back. Let me formulate a question the following way. There were a lot of pilots, a lot of experiments with the basic income in different countries. I would ask questions immediately, one myself and another is from the audience. Why all these experiments actually stopped? Why they were not extended long in time? And the question from Oleg Kutnyakov is the following: some capitalists say, say the theory of basic income is a tool to make lazy people rich, but their habits, I mean people habits, not capitalist habits, will not make them truly rich and happy in a long term. So I decided to unite together, but all these experiments, though were not somehow convincing economically, they're convincing morally and in terms of the goodies. People felt much better after implementing the basic income in different countries, starting from Manitoba probably and in India. Why actually they're not lasting? Why they stopped? And really, do you agree that in the long term they will not work?
Okay, first of all, a pilot by definition, is short term. I designed the pilot that we did in India, and we made it 18 months. We said it would begin on a certain day and it would end on a certain day, because then you look at the results and you have a certain amount of funds for paying thousands of people a basic income. And the same happened in Finland. The same you mentioned in Manitoba. That was disrupted by political change a long time ago. But some pilots have lasted deliberately for years. As I've talked in my book, I've mentioned some of them. One in North Carolina has been going on for 20 years, and others have been longer periods. But most importantly, in answering your question, at the moment, there are about 80 pilots going on today. In other words, they've started, but they haven't finished, okay? But what I can say is what I said in my talk, that the results of these different pilots are remarkably similar. And I won't repeat what I said, but I think it's an important point. The other point about making lazy people rich, the sort of amount of money we're talking about as a minimum basic income is not going to make anybody rich unless they use it to do something else and enable them to be entrepreneurial. And I would like to read to you a statement made by a man in Britain who today is the wealthiest man in Britain. He's the richest man in Britain. And he wrote, he said, I made 5,127 prototypes of my vacuum cleaner before I got it right. Those were 5,126 failures. But I learned from each one. That's why I came up with the solution. So I don't mind failure. I've always thought we should accept failure. Now, of course, he was only enabled to do those 5,127 failures because his wife was providing him with a basic income. He was dependent on his wife's income to enable him to spend all that time in the garage failing, right? So for me, if you have, his name is James Dyson, he makes very good equipment. And there are other cases where people who've been provided with help from other sources have suddenly gone and made a breakthrough. That's surely good. That's surely good. We must understand that, yes, a lot of people, if they had a basic income, wouldn't be an inventor, but they'd probably be better people, and they would be healthier people. And they would be people that you and I would like to meet, and they wouldn't be beggars. We have made society in the modern era, not in Ukraine, but everywhere, into beggars society. If I go to the United States, I see beggars on every corner, holding out their hand or dying on the road in cardboard boxes. Let's be honest. We don't want that sort of society in the 21st century. And we don't need to do that. Please let us be open and want for other people what we would want for ourselves and for our children. That's not too big a demand, is it?
No, I'm fully in doubt whether I should ask more questions or harder questions or whatever, and or just to copy, because you have just finished on a very emotional, very positive point, and I believe it's a good point even to stop. Though, if you have time, we can continue. Yes, the society we're building. Let's a little bit far away from economy. In your book, Precariat, you in particular somehow promote this multi-citizenship, not multi-citizenship, multi-identities, and the possibility for a people to be associated with different groups and be identical with different groups, and to create a certain kind of possibility of people to migrate from one group to another. It's a bit difficult concept. I'd like to ask this question to you a little bit to explain how you can see it, because currently in Ukraine we have a war, and this multiculturalism, especially if I would put Russian or whatever, and multi accepting a different opinion during the war, is a quite I would say it very softly sensitive issue. So it's not very easy to accept this matter. Could you please somehow comment on this and try to explain your point?
Yeah, in a brief answer to your question, I wrote a book called The Precariat, the New Dangerous Class, which was published in 2011. Since then, it has been translated into 24 languages including Russian, but not Ukrainian. And it's just come out in Hebrew. It's about to come out in Indonesian, of all countries. And the book is essentially about how the class structure across the world has changed in the context of what I've called earlier rentier capitalism, with the plutocracy and an elite of very wealthy people, a salariat of declining employment security, an old proletariat that is fading away, and a precariat underneath. And the precariat consists of millions and millions of people who feel insecure, they have unstable labor, they have low and falling real wages without access to non-wage benefits, and they feel they're losing the rights of citizenship. They don't have civil rights or economic or social rights, and the state is failing them all over the world. I've called it a dangerous class because the part that is uneducated listen to the voices of a Trump or a Johnson or Orban or a Putin who promises to bring back yesterday. That's dangerous. They listen because today is worse than yesterday. The second part of the precariat consists of the refugees, the migrants, the people who don't have a today. They don't vote for populists, but they are disenfranchised. They don't participate in the political process. That too is dangerous. And the third part are the young educated who go to university, and their parents and their teachers say, go to university, go to college, and you will have a future. And they come out and they don't have a future. They have debts, they have disappointments, they have frustrations. They won't go and vote for the old political ideologies, state communism, state socialism, or right-wing neoliberal economics. They won't vote for these extremes. They are looking for what I call a new politics of paradise, a new progressive, convivial type of politics that's ecological, it's social, it's slowing down, it's giving communities support, it's rebuilding our commons, about which I write a lot. It's this group that write to me every single day. And I've been invited to give more than 800 talks in 40 countries, including China, where there's a huge precariat. And what I've been impressed with is that millions of people understand. They understand. And the politicians have not reached out to the precariat. They're not just victims. They're looking for a better future. They're looking. They won't vote for the populists. They hate Putin and Trump and Johnson. They hate them. But they're looking for some better politics. And that's great, fantastic. So for me, they're dangerous to the state because they will not accept the old ideologies and stupidities and evils. And when I give a talk to them, like I did last Saturday, where I think there were 300 people, I see the energy, I feel it. It's fantastic, it's fantastic. And all I say to them is, go for it. Make people like you and me, Slav, feel uncomfortable. That's great. That's great. Okay?
Yes,
because
okay.
basically our generation has let them down. Even before the disgust of this war, which is obviously, crazy. But even without that, we haven't created a society where all groups can feel they're going forward. And that is the challenge they've got to face.
Yeah, a lot of challenges also to how to proceed and how to end this discussion. We have some questions related to technical to references of researchers, so whatever. I believe I will not ask you ask you immediately to somehow, but if possible, then we'll address you and you will provide probably information and references to further reading about that or another pilot and that or another research, because a lot of skepticism obviously appears, especially from those who are not aware of the previous results, and obviously from the idea itself. It's so striking different from all the ideas which are currently discussed. Enemies and giants, as you called, are discussing quite a lot, but solutions normally comes from a liberal standpoint, let's say, to make everybody free, not paying any taxes, and then there will be a happiness for everybody. It's some kind of a extreme variant. So we will provide on your behalf, and telling we will provide on the website the further references of questions, and those questions will be saved. Probably you will pick up some to answer yourself. We have 3 minutes for the allocated time, and I have a really, I'll say, full of gratefulness to thank you, Professor Standin, for the bright and, as always, very emotional presentations, for your optimism and belief that this society could be built and we could done. And I personally also fully support that not only economical reasons should drive our decisions about the future, because economy itself is a little bit strange creature at the moment, after a number or dozens or hundreds, I don't know how many Nobel laureates created this absolutely outstanding knowledge base. So thank you once again, and addressing to all the participants, I would like to remind everybody that we shall have a video record on the website, and would like to invite you for our next meeting, which will come on the next week, just in a week, and we shall have Dr. Thomas Chamorro-Premuzic. I hope I will just correctly pronounce the name. He is a Chief Innovation Officer at Manpower Group and Professor of Business Psychology at University College in London. And the lecture will be about leaders we have, the leaders we need, and what makes the difference. Dr. Thomas Chamorro-Premuzic is a leading psychologist and going into the first dozens of the social psychologists of the world. Access to the lecture is through our website, and if you wish to join supporters of our educational initiative for temporarily displaced women who plan to start our business in Ukraine, please donate whatever amount you would like to. Thank you again, and I'm looking forward to meet you all in a week with kindest regards, and again with greatest thanks to you, Professor Standin. Time for goodbye. Yeah.
And glory to Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine.
We shall overcome. The triumph will be ours.
Great. I look forward to coming back to Ukraine one day.
You will be always welcome.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.
The war in Ukraine has changed the world, and now we need to think about where this world is moving to, together. That's why MIM Business School is launching the nationwide educational project ReInforceUA, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week on ReInforceUA.com. The war in Ukraine has changed the world. And now we need to think about where this world is moving to, together. That's why MIM Business School is launching the nationwide educational project ReInforceUA, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week